Hello. In the previous video lessons, I introduced the current account through some accounting identities and also then some kind of empirical examples. So now that we understand what the current account means, it's time to then consider some political economy of trade deficits. So let me start by looking at some data from the USA. So the U.S. trade deficit is often appearing in the like political discussions. And for example, I took here from the Forbes an article: the U.S. trade deficit is a problem, but not for the reason you think. And in this article, then also there is for recent years, even to the mid 2024, we see that the current account deficit is in the magnitude of hundreds of billions of dollars per quarter. So and it also indicates that the USA imports more goods than it's exporting. So this has been a relatively stable and long-term phenomenon. So on the right-hand side of the slide, I took also from the IMF World Economic Outlook article some diagram that indicates also how the US imports indicated by the blue curve has been persistently higher than the US exports indicated by the yellow curve. And this is already from the late 70s. So that means that there's this current account deficit has been a fairly long-term phenomenon in the USA, and then it often comes the question that is this sustainable in the long term, or are we approaching to some kind of crisis? So let's first start from the point of view of a small country. I come back to the USA shortly, but let's think of a small country such as Finland, and why such a kind of persistent current account deficit would be a problem for small countries such as Finland. So remember from the discussion of the accounting identities that, of course, the current account deficit could arise from different reasons. So if the current account deficit reflects an excessive imports over exports, it could be an indication of some competitiveness problems that if you talk about the example of Finland, if Finland had a current account deficit, then perhaps the Finnish goods are not competitive enough in the world market. On the other hand, we can remember from these decompositions or this kind of accounting identities that current account deficit could also be related to the government deficits. So if the deficit reflects low savings rather than high investment, it might be caused by reckless fiscal policy by the government. Or if it is more like private savings, then it could be some kind of consumption binge. So there are many reasons that could contribute to the current account deficit. So it would be, of course, first of all, important to understand what is the driver of this kind of deficit. But the question is really, irrespective of what is the source of the deficit, why it could be a problem for a small country. So there is not really a problem as long as the foreign investors or perhaps even foreign governments are willing to then hold domestic assets or domestic debt to finance this deficit. But if the foreign investors lose their confidence, they might pull out their holdings, and this has happened, for example, in Mexico or Thailand. You can read more of those examples in the textbook by Krugman et al. And if then, for example, the government does not get financing for its activities, or the interest rates for the government debt increase to prohibitively high levels, then the government may be forced to either increase taxes or decrease its expenditures. And this can be very disruptive to the economy if the country is forced to run large, for example, government surpluses or large saving to repay what it has borrowed. So this can lead to a very, very painful crisis then. So this is why if a current account deficit persists long enough time in a small country, then it can end up to a crisis. So the question then is, how can the USA run such kind of long-term current account deficit without apparently any problem? So the USA is a special case in this sense, and this relates to the position of the US dollar as this kind of world's predominant currency and reserve currency also for the many central banks. So for the United States, notice that U.S. assets owned by international investors, also central banks and governments, they are predominantly denominated in U.S. dollars. So the foreign debtors have the assets in U.S. dollars. In contrast, about 2/3 of the U.S. assets abroad, so assets that Americans are holding in other countries, they are denominated in foreign currency, such as euros or pounds or whatever. So therefore, there is a simple mechanism that relates to the foreign exchange rates. So because the U.S. dollar is floating against many of the other foreign currencies. So consider what happens if the foreign exchange rate of the dollar decreases. So this would mean then that this holdings of American investors abroad appreciate in dollar terms. So in terms of US dollars, these assets, foreign assets, become more valuable. And on the other hand, the dollar-denominated US liabilities do not change their value. So this is why then this kind of currency depreciation is a self-correcting mechanism that can balance and bring more stability to this kind of US international investment account. So in contrast, if I compare, for example, the situation in Finland, Finland doesn't have this kind of own currency currently. So we have you're part of the euro system, and I will discuss this monetary union later in the videos. But then also, for example, then the monetary policy channel is not really in the hands of the Finnish government or any kind of government organization. Whereas then, of course, the USA can also have its independent monetary policy, and this kind of structure of the U.S. asset holdings abroad versus foreign asset holdings in the USA, then makes it very easy to finance this kind of deficit. So this diagram taken from the Krugman et al. Textbook indicates this kind of dependence between current account fluctuations and fluctuations in the real exchange rate of the US dollar, and we see that there is this kind of at least intertemporal dependence between the current account deficits and the dollar exchange rate. So in the next video lessons, we will then look into the exchange rates and determination of exchange rates in more detail. But before going to that, let me still highlight the fact that we shouldn't also think about the current account deficit and surplus in this kind of mercantilist terms, that current account surplus is also not a desirable situation. But indeed, if a country runs a persistent current account surplus, it can also create its own problems. So remember that for given level of national savings S, an increased current account surplus implies that there is less domestic investment. So national savings was equal to the domestic investment plus current account. So if current account is positive, there is a trade-off that then there will be less domestic investment, and that could also then be a problem that this domestic industry, for example, is not so competitive that it's worth to invest in the home country. And typically, of course, domestic policymakers would prefer domestic investment over building assets based abroad. So typically, of course, then if when you increase the capital stock in the home country, there's jobs created, and there is this increases your output, and therefore then you can collect also domestic tax revenue, and there can be also many kinds of positive spillover effects into the domestic economy. So in that sense, this kind of running a persistent current account surplus is also not necessarily a good thing if it is then if there's a trade-off with the smaller domestic investment. But then there's also both business risks and political risks also associated with the current account surplus, because if then private and public sector investors are investing heavily abroad, then there's of course potentially higher risks. For example, if they are holding foreign government debt, there can be like default risks. Same is of course true for the foreign companies. And if there is, for example, persistent current account surplus, like there has been between the USA and China, so that for a long time China has run a current account surplus, whereas the USA has a current account deficit. So then it may be tempting for the foreign government to, for example, use some measures such as increasing tariffs to balance this kind of current account deficits. And this is something that the new administration by Donald Trump in the USA has kind of indicated to do. So for these reasons, also the current account surplus is not the blessing. So I mentioned about the relation of current account surplus and deficit and the currency exchange rates. So indeed, the next theme of the course, we will look into the determination of the exchange rates. See you then. Bye bye.